This is screen capture video 12.5, the fifth video in the series. In the last video, I was talking about albinism. And specifically in humans, it's unfortunate because people tend to be very pale, even if they're darker skinned, darker featured. And interestingly, it seems that this mutation occurs more often in darker skinned people than lighter skinned people. And that's what brings up the screen where you see the African albinos killed by their own people. I went to the YouTube page. I used to have 2 or 3 news reports, videos that I had recorded, or not recorded, but I had links to, and those links are no longer valid. They don't go anywhere, and so I'm not able to share those with you. I wish I could, because they actually follow. One woman had her arms cut off because she was albino in an African village. I think it was in Tanzania, if I remember correctly. And they showed some other albinos, and they are hunted by their own countrymen, by their own people, in a sense. The difference is they're white, and their neighbors and other citizens are darker skin. And there's a superstition amongst many of the Africans that if they can use body parts from human albinos, that it will help in their fishing and their hunting and help them to be successful in life. So they will hunt down albinos, kill them, they'll take their blood and their body parts, and they'll sell them, and they can make money actually selling their body parts. And that might seem like a fantastic claim, and so I do put the link here, and if you care to follow it, it'll take you to YouTube, and you can watch different YouTubes. This is actually from Scientific American. I believe that doesn't work anymore. I'm not sure what happened to my link. I'm going to have to find that, because I did have a link to YouTube series of videos, and I will put that up because I want you to be able to see this. This is the ABC News link that doesn't work anymore. I put it up in case anybody wants to try to follow it and see if they can find it. I couldn't find it. I wish I could. But I must have not put that link in there, but I will provide that outside the video. Okay, so I do have a link now, and went and found it. It may or may not be the same one I had before, but you can go through and look at the videos on your own. Just be aware the videos, the information may be disturbing because they're talking about people having their arms and body parts hacked off, in some cases being killed because the very fact that they're different color. They're lighter skin. And I have found on another website that it tells what mutations have occurred. There are a couple different types of mutations. There's OCA1, OCA2 that will cause albinism in human beings. The person will have all the same features of their race, but they're just lighter hair, lighter eye color, lighter skin color. They tend to be more prone to developing skin cancer and blindness, unfortunately, and reduced life expectancy. Not just because they're being hunted, but because of mutation. In the wild, being an albino is a detriment to most organisms because they show up better, and especially if they're a hunter or if they are going to be preyed upon by other animals. If they're white, they show up and they don't hide as well. If they're in snow, it's not so bad, but not during warmer times of the year or warmer climates. Here's an albino chimp. Does not have pink eyes. Looks like 2 different eyes are 2 different colors, but very light color. A little bit of gray, dark in some of its hair, but very light in complexion and hair. Here's an albino alligator. Again, very light eyes, appear to be pink. And the reason the eyes are pink is because oftentimes there is a lack of pigmentation, which would cover the capillaries. And there are capillaries in the iris of the eye, And if there's no pigmentation to cover the capillaries, then you see the color of the blood in the capillaries, the pinkish color. And usually the skin or the hair would be very light in color. The all-white white-tailed deer in Illinois are protected by law. As of the 1990s, and I haven't researched this recently, but in Indiana, all white-tailed deer or albino deer were allowed to be killed. And the Department of what would be Natural Resources in Indiana, I don't know what it goes by name, but they actually encouraged people to kill the all-white white-tailed deer because they realized it was due to a mutation, and there'd be a certain amount of inbreeding in animals to get that all-white color. And so the thinking amongst biologists in Indiana was if they kill those deer, then they'll reduce the inbreeding and the all-white coloration, because they're probably carrying some other recessive genes that are negative for the individual. In Illinois, it's illegal to kill all white-tailed deer, and I don't know that they're albinos, but people like to look at them and see them. It's a novelty, and so they're protected in Illinois. It's interesting how different states have different policies. The last part of this video, I want to talk about DNA fingerprinting. And with the fingerprinting, you could actually take samples of tissue that would contain DNA and link them to individuals. And this has been done since the 1980s. Genetic work was done in the 1980s to try to link animals and plants. And there was a case in England in 1986 involved a man by the name of Colin Pitchfork. And they didn't know who was committing terrible crimes back in the mid-80s. But there were two young girls, about 2-3 years apart, I guess roughly 3 years apart, that were sexually molested and murdered. And it was a relatively small community in England, and it greatly troubled the residents of the area. And so police went, supposedly this is what a geneticist from England told me, that the police went to some biologists and said, we have semen samples taken from the crime scene, from these two girls. Is it possible we could link these with the person who committed the crime? And they said, yes, but we need a suspect. And this is where it's interesting. In Europe, people don't have the civil rights that they have here in the United States. It took years and years even to get DNA samples from inmates who are convicted of crimes in the United States. And unfortunately, in all the states, it's not all the criminals. In some cases, it's just those who have been convicted of sex crimes or more violent crimes such as murder. But in Europe, people don't have the civil rights. So in the municipality, the police told all the men, you're going to give a DNA sample. And so they had to submit DNA samples. And they gave those to the biologist, and they tried to do a match, and there was no match. And so they're back to square one, so to speak. Well, it turns out there was a guy that went to a local pub, and he was bragging to some others that he had paid, and this geneticist described him as the village moron, paid him to give a tissue sample in his name. So they found out who was doing the bragging. They went to this guy and said, you're going to give a tissue sample. And he did. And they found their match. And in 1986, Colin Pitchfork was convicted for the two murders of these two girls, and he's serving in prison because of that. That was in 1986. That was the first case where DNA was used as evidence to convict somebody. So from 1986 in England, it's been used around the world, and including the United States, to try and convict people, and has been done so successfully. It has also exonerated people who are wrongfully convicted of crimes. One tragic case, a guy spent about a quarter of a century in prison down in Texas. His name was, I'll have to think about it. The man's name was Michael Morton, and there was a video on Netflix a few years ago about it. A famous case in Texas. He was convicted in 1986 and he was exonerated in 2011. Almost 25 years he spent in prison. And it was with the help of DNA that he was exonerated, and it was with help of DNA that they convicted the suspect who actually committed the crime. But it was in his wife's murder and rape and murder. He was convicted. Very unfortunate. He spent a good portion of his life in prison. But that DNA evidence helped to exonerate him. If you get a chance to read that story or see the video, I think it's a worthwhile video. Quite a story to listen to. In this illustration I have, it shows DNA that can be picked up from a crime scene. They may have more than one suspect, and when they separate out the DNA, they cut it with enzymes and run it across an electrophoretic gel. They have little wells or little indentations, and they'll put the sample of DNA in liquid. They run it across the gel with electricity, and the DNA will separate out based on its electrical conductivity and its weight, and you get these different banding patterns. And so this is the sample that's left at the crime scene. You try to match it up, and most reasonable people would say this banding pattern over here on the right matches the one on the left. And this is done in the lab with the help of enzymes. The enzymes can be used to cut the DNA in very specific places, and those smaller pieces then are run across this electrophoretic gel. And then you can stain the gel with methylene blue. There's something else that's a carcinogen. I've used methylene blue in the past, but if you use the carcinogen, you just want to be careful not to get it on your hands. And it colors those banding patterns and makes them easier to see. Some famous cases that involve DNA. Excuse me. In the mid-1990s, President Bill Clinton was serving as President of the United States, and he was accused of having had an affair in the White House. And interestingly, the woman that he had a sexual encounter with, probably on more than one occasion, was wearing a blue dress during the encounter and ended up with his semen stain on the dress. I guess she was performing a sex act on him, and she saved the dress, of all things. It seemed strange to me at the time, but because she did, she was told of somebody else that what had happened, and word got out. And so the president was questioned on this. The woman was a young woman, and this is before the Me Too movement. Now this would have been looked down upon, and the press would have, well, maybe they would have been on it, maybe they weren't. They're quite friendly to the Clintons, and tended to excuse the behavior. But President Bill Clinton initially denied they'd had any kind of sexual activity, an affair with the woman. And then slowly, little by little, he kind of admitted to a mistake, but never really addressed it. And probably would have been denied, and people would have believed his denial, because many people believed it at the time, except there was this DNA evidence. And because of the extraction method they used at the time, they could tell whether it was somatic DNA from somatic cells or from sex cells, because they extracted the DNA differently from semen. And so probably his advisors eventually came to him and said, Mr. President, scientists and the public will eventually know that is your semen on her dress, and you won't be able to deny it. And so the truth set in, and realized he wouldn't be able to hide it from the public. I'll state a little bit more about this in the next video, and it's in the next video I'll probably finish up.